All right. Welcome to Happy Little APIs, Ask the Experts. Welcome to my team here. I've got some duplicate sound there. That's fixed. Hey, I'm gonna introduce this team here. I'm gonna introduce you guys in just a minute. I really appreciate y'all being here. Also, if you're watching, I'm really glad you're here. This is Happy Little APIs, Ask the Experts. And this team in front of you, minus the one up in the top left, are the experts. Okay, so real quick, starting with Ryan, would y'all introduce yourselves?
Hey, I'm Ryan Wade. I'm the director for API Gateway, and super happy to be here today. Thank you for setting this up.
All right, excellent. Let's go to Zainab.
Hi, this is Zainab. I'm the principal product manager for API Gateway. Super excited to talk to all of you.
All righty, and George.
Hey everyone, my name is George Mao, and I'm the worldwide tech lead for AWS Serverless. Thank you for the invite. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. All righty, and let's jump up to Alan.
Hey, my name is Alan. I'm a senior product manager with Amazon API Gateway. I'm super happy to be back in season 2. You might remember me from season 1.
I do, yes. And last but definitely not least, the man with the beard, Mr. Bob Kenny. Tell us who you are.
Hi, so I'm Bob Kinney. I'm one of the senior engineers on the API Gateway team, and very happy to be rejoining Eric and everybody else for season 2 of Ask the Experts.
All right, and I am thrilled that you are here also. We've got some questions that have already came into me early that I'm going to be putting here. Also, I would tell you, if you're watching the stream, you might be watching it on YouTube, you might be watching it on Twitch. Post your questions and we'll try to answer them. One of the first questions we have, we're just gonna get this out of the way here, was from THUL Full Simo. We don't know who that is. First question is, why do I hate pineapple pizza so much? I don't hate pizza. I just don't like pineapple on pizza. It is a waste of time. We've gotten that out of the way. We're just going to move along away from that. So, all right. Okay. So, one of the first questions I'm going to throw out, and we're going to cover some tech questions, but we're also going to cover some, maybe a little bit of like what's happening, what's coming, what did we do, where'd we go? I may ask some questions that Ryan will go, I can't tell you that, but I'm going to try to push for some. I'm going to push the edge. I'm going to push the limit we're at. I'm already, like I said, one Diet Dr. Pepper in. So, do with that what you will. I'm getting ready to do another one. All right. So let's jump over to some of the questions we have. And the first one is going to be a tech question. And I had this come into me earlier. And I'll start easy. Okay. We'll kind of go easy and then we'll build up from there. So one of the ones is, what are one of the best ways to integrate Amazon API Gateway with Open API? Now, first of all, and I'm going to let, who wants to jump on that one? Open API with the API Gateway, how do you integrate it? All righty. I'll call on you. How about Bob? Why don't you jump on that one? Is that good? And if you want to go, hey, point to someone else, that's fine.
Well, no. So, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the question is really trying to get at. So I'll try to tease out a little bit of information, or at least talk about how Open API, how we integrate with Open API inside of API Gateway. But unfortunately, if we don't have further contact with the original asker, we might have to just kind of like leave it at that. But so. Open API is for people who might not be familiar, is an open standard for defining APIs, and API Gateway supports that as both an import and export mechanism. So that allows you to basically define your API using the Open API specification, and then import that API directly into API Gateway. And then we add on what are called extensions that allow us to customize the actual integration, or the way that the API is configured inside of API Gateway. So setting the integrations to go to the Lambda function that you might be trying to write to, or setting up the authorizers as well. But that's the main mechanism for integration with Open API is that import and export mechanism. It allows you to author your API definition using open standard tools that use Open API, and then import and export it back out and maintain sort of that same surface area of the API. It's a common mechanism that customers use to to replicate their APIs across regions, as well as to replicate their APIs across accounts if necessary.
And something really cool there. Something really cool there is that because we support the export side, and if you're not familiar with OpenAPI, you can actually define the full API, for example, using the API Gateway console, right? Turn these features, build out your API, and then once you're ready, you can actually export that into OpenAPI. So you can take advantage of the OpenAPI spec without actually knowing how to write it. So I think that is also another really powerful aspect of our integration.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've pointed out often too, and folks, because I work with OpenAPI, and I'm not an OpenAPI expert in any way, shape, or form, but it's a great way to migrate and move around from different things, and especially with the extensibility that we've added, the AWS extensibility into there, because OpenAPI is extensible, right? And so the ability to say, oh, I'm going to build it in the console, then I'm going to export it, and then I'm going to tell everybody I wrote it, right? So that, I mean, that's really handy to be able to move that and then modify that. So great. All right. Now we have a question actually coming in on the chat. I'm going to post it out here. It says, is API Gateway designed for back end, for front end use cases, to serve web or mobile app? Let's that's a good question, because we kind of want to, if you're new to API Gateway, how would you kind of sum up what is API Gateway? I'm going to go to Zainab. Would you throw that up? You have extensive background in API Gateway, so I'm going to throw that to you. Oh, you're muted, Zainab. I got you. Uh-oh. Yeah, you need to unmute, Zainab. It won't let me unmute you. All right, well, here's what we're going to do until she can get that unmuted here. Ryan, will you jump on it?
Sure.
Ryan also, as our director, has extensive background in API Gateway as well. The whole team does.
Hey, so I'll go for this while we're waiting for Zainab to kick in. You know, API Gateway works as a front door for a variety of different types of backend services, and people use mobile clients to talk to API Gateway and then talk to those backend services, as well as traditional desktops and server-to-server communications. In fact, there's a growing amount of workloads on API Gateway that are just internal communications, where people set up private APIs that exist inside of AWS and aren't exposed publicly. And they use API Gateway as kind of the front door between different services that are within their own infrastructure. This is actually very similar to the way that AWS builds a lot of our services. You know, we need to make sure that we're able to protect and throttle each of our services as they're calling other services, so that no one service can knock down another internal service. We use something very similar to API Gateway. It predates API Gateway by over a decade. But we have a lot of customers, particularly some customers in the internet services space, that use API Gateway for private APIs to be able to throttle between their internal services and make sure that a single internal service doesn't knock down some other internal service.
All right, excellent. All right, so here's another question, and I get this a lot. And George, I'm going to throw this at you as one of our lead essays, and your title's long. It's huge. I like it. So when I'm building an application, and maybe I have an application, and I'm building microservices within micro applications to build a huge application, right? And that's one of the things we talk about at AWS a lot, is how do we build in microservices? How do we distribute, limit the blast radius, uncoupled applications? And we put them a lot of across accounts. How do you, or what are some of the recommended patterns for building API Gateway across multiple accounts, across multiple parts of an application?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting question. So API Gateway is really powerful. It has the ability to integrate with multiple different backends. So it could be Lambda functions, can be HTTP endpoints, could be really any AWS service on the back end. And you can invoke these things across any account. So when you create these integrations, you can provide API Gateway with what we call a execution role. And that role is what API Gateway will use to invoke the downstream service on the back end. So that's one pattern. You could have API Gateway as your, like Ryan said, like your front door to all of your backend services across multiple accounts. What's also powerful is that since it's a fully managed service in the serverless platform, You can also just deploy multiple instances of APIs, and these APIs could be representing different environments, could be different use cases, different projects. But at the end of the day, you're never managing anything because API Gateway does all of that heavy lifting for you.
All right. So I've heard folks ask, okay, so some patterns like an umbrella API over smaller ones, right? What about using custom domains? Can you point custom domains to multiple accounts?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can stand up a custom domain, which is going to be something like, myapi.mycompany.com. Sure. And you can point this and set the paths to point to multiple different APIs behind the scenes using resource paths, right? Okay. And then what that means is as you invoke, as a customer or a client invokes that custom domain, behind the scenes we'll route to the correct API for you, and you don't have to manage all of that routing.
Okay, excellent. Anybody want to add on that? All right. Okay, thumbs up. All right, so we have a question coming in. It says, why does VPC terminate? Why does a VPC link terminate at NLB? Alan, I'm going to throw this to you because we've done some work on this, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. So VPC link, due to just the way how it's implemented, VPC link can only send a request to a private NLB. However, we did release the VPC link v2, which is available as part of our HTTP APIs product. And that one supports both NLBs, ALBs, and actually supports just generally any IP address and port. So for example, if you had IP addresses in a port stored in CloudMap, which is another service discovery service that we have, you can actually route directly to those as well. So it's not limited to the load balancers.
Yeah, and if you're familiar with kind of how to do that, or if you're looking for how to do that, in an earlier episode of this very series that we're doing, Happy Little APIs, in episode 1, we talked through that whole thing on how my guest is Ran Ribbonzaf from Epsagon, and we talked through, dare I say, containers and containers behind API Gateway. So, yep. All right. So another question we have is, how can I make sure that only my application running in S3, it's a JavaScript app, can access the API Gateway in the same account? Anybody want to jump on that one? Bob, you want to go for it?
Sure, I can give it a stab. So obviously, API Gateway offers a number of different authentication mechanisms. So it really kind of depends on what you're able to embed inside of your application. Certainly, the most primitive and certainly wouldn't be my first recommendation would be API keys. So that's just literally a bearer token that's included in the request. And I see that it's linked in the comment. The same person mentioned that they would have to embed that in plain text in the JS app, which is true. And so that's why we don't necessarily recommend that as a first pattern. But then we offer additional authentication mechanisms using either SigV4, so the same authorization scheme that all AWS services use. You can actually enable on your API. Now, obviously, in order for that to work, then you also need to then have access to credentials. And so then using an authenticated user, either via Cognito or some custom authorization scheme, to basically be able to get federated credentials in to be able to sign the request. And then if you don't want to go for the SigV4 route, you can go all the way to just using a Lambda authorizer, where you can write your own custom authorization logic to do validation of the request. So those are the mechanisms that we sort of have out of the box for securing an application like that.
All righty. So I've got a question here. Thanks, Bob. That exactly. We've got a question. Any API design pattern for reference? We have in this Happy Little APIs. This is obviously season 2 that we're doing. On Twitch, we have season 1. I'm going to ask Rob Sutter, who's moderating for us, if he'll grab the link to that on Twitch. We talk about a ton of patterns for API design. And would you all throw out any other references that you know? Nothing, huh? All righty. Okay. So, all right. And Zainab, are you able to unmute yet? Oh, still issues. Okay. All righty. Well, wait. Zainab's going to wave at us because she can't talk at the moment. But I appreciate it. She's going to give us information in the chat. So when we get to, sorry about that. All right. So next question we have. Let me pop this up even as I read it here. Says, is there a JSON schema support so that schema can be shared across different APIs? So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but Ryan, you want to jump on that one?
Sure. Like taking a look at this as far as Swagger support, we support Swagger as well as Open API standards, and you'd be able to use those to both import and export Open API definitions right with API Gateway right out of the gate. This is something that we're constantly working on doing better at. Like as these standards evolve, we want to make sure that we continue to keep up with them, and we're super committed to making sure that we support Open API as that standard keeps moving forward. In fact, I'm hoping we'll be making stronger contributions ourselves as we become, I would say, more and more opinionated about how we can help out with the general API community.
Yeah, excellent. All right, here's a question, and I'm going to throw it to Ryan to see if he wants to answer this, because this is one of those like, well, I'm not sure. It says, what's the primary programming language used to program AWS services?
There is not one. I would say, like, if something really jumped out, it would probably be Java is one of the languages we use most commonly across AWS. But one of the things we try to do at AWS is not have big top-down rules about how to do software engineering. So if particular teams feel like they want to use Go, they can use Go as their programming language. And in fact, part of the new data plane in API Gateway is written using Go. If you wanted to use Ruby, you could do that. We actually have some old services that still have some Ruby code in them. And we have some people that write stuff in newer languages. We do have very strong operational practices inside of AWS. And so we do require people to adhere to what we call operational readiness reviews. But the programming language that you use to be able to adhere to those operational standards is something that we leave open to a lot of the engineering teams to develop. So we have Rust, Go, Java, some C, and Ruby, and some other languages that are used in AWS services.
If you're interested in Swift, I've been goofing around with I didn't make the Swift runtime, but how to use Swift with SAM. So, and I actually have a Swift API with HTTP API example. If you're looking for that, I'm realizing that I'm doing shameless plugs over and over. But to help you out, understanding custom runtimes versus any runtime you want to run, because API Gateway is really agnostic to the language that's being used behind or in front of it. So. All righty. So we have another question about VTL. Everybody's favorite VTL. It says, VTL plays an important role in direct API gateway service integrations and AppSync. Are there any plans to improve the VTL development? VTL is perfect, so no. And debugging, logging templates are default templates for service integrations. Ryan, what do you think? And again, this is what I'm going to throw back to you.
I think we've had some customers tell us that they don't have a deep and loving relationship with VTL, and they'd love us to do something different. And we are totally trying to figure out if there are things we can do better. At the same time, we have some customers that do have a deep and loving relationship with VTL. And in fact, one of them is right here with Eric. So who's written a ton of actually really interesting services. If you go and look at his Twitter feed, you'll see a bunch of things about like how to use API Gateway to just directly front other services using VTL. It's very, I'm actually amazed at just how much you can do inside of VTL. But I think we do have some customers that are asking us to do more in the space and say like, hey, how could I actually, do something that's more Lambda-like, in terms of being able to do transforms or validation or something like that. And we're totally looking at those options as we go forward.
Awesome. Yeah, I learned VTL because that's what it was, right? So I'm not married to it, but the thing is, it's powerful. You can do a lot there. And yeah, direct integration's a really interesting way. George, I'm going to throw this one at you. It says, how does the use of features such as auth, data transformations, and canary release deployments affect request latency introduced by API Gateway?
That is a great question. So Most of those features are built right into the service. None of these features will impact really your downstream latency. So we have multiple different CloudWatch metrics right out of the box. Two of them, the most important ones you want to look at, are latency and integration latency. So together, these two different metrics will give you an overview of how your API is performing. And then specifically with Canary release deployments, this is really a feature that allows you to roll out changes and new APIs, and then wait the traffic that's going between one API to another. So that really is going to send traffic to two different backend deployments of the API, but it won't really, it's not going to affect total overall performance. But we're always constantly, and the team is constantly looking at doing everything we can to improve performance. And I think we'll probably discuss it later, but there's a newer flavor of API Gateway called HTTP APIs. And we've worked really hard at reducing all of the overhead and stuff. You'll see that we're performing really awesome, something like 60+% reduction in overall latency from the service.
All right. Hey, Ryan, I want to tell you that you made Rob Sutter very happy when you started with Go. So that's it was a happy Rob right there. So, all righty. So, Alan, or anybody can jump in. Which are common customer mistakes using API Gateway?
Yeah, I'll start with one, and then other people can jump in as well. So the one I see a lot is that customers don't think about the throttling limits sort of across the application, right? So one example is, we get a lot of requests for, hey, I'm going to do an app launch on X date. I need to have, this giant spike in throttling capacity, but they just think about API Gateway, as the front door. So we just need to increase the limit there. But they don't think about, all the other components and microservices that power that application. So something we started doing is that we actually asked the customer to actually try it out in these incremental steps to prevent sort of this mistake and to kind of get them to think about the application as a whole. But even in the default case, I think throttling is a very important thing to protect your backend with. And API Gateway has a bunch of levers to help you with that, right? We have throttling at the account level, at the per route and method level. So for example, if your post integrations are more expensive, for example, because they do this read write, you can set a lower throttling limit there. All your gets can still have the default high limit. And then another important one is to combine it with API keys as well. So then one client can't overload your whole API. Yeah. I'll let Ryan go. I think he put his hand up.
Well, I just wanted to add something else. We've seen that in our REST API product, we saw that some customers ran into problems integrating API Gateway with Lambda. And one of the big things we pushed to fix as we went into building HTTP APIs was creating a new version of that integration with Lambda, and makes it a lot easier for people to get those products working together and to avoid some of the mistakes that popped up in the past. We call it a strongly typed integration is what we call it internally. And it's something that we're seeing helps people get different products working with API Gateway, using API Gateway as that front door, and something that we hope to do more of in the future.
Oh, Eric, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear her. Zainab, yay, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, the laptop was fanning itself for the longest time.
All right.
So apologies for that. Adding to that, over the years, actually, you see a lot of, well, not a lot. We do see customers not be completely sure of when to use what kind of method. We see those kind of, very initial starting problems as well. The other one I would want to point out is, confusion around using invalid authorizers and authenticators as well. So that's a common mistake we see across customers. Like, at what point should I use an authorizer versus an authenticator? And sometimes they run into issues because of that.
All righty. Yeah, and I think folks do get confused. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to add maybe just two last points. So I obviously, in my role, often interact with people who are actively using the service. And So the two things that I've noticed that are common problems are timeouts, integration timeout tuning. So this is a really good general operational hygiene. So by default, API Gateway sets the integration timeout to be the max supported timeout of 29 seconds. For a lot of use cases, that's way too much time for an API call to actually take. And so you can set on a per method basis that integration timeout to be sort of the P99 or P95 of what your actual integration latency is. Can fail faster. So if your backend is not responding, or if there's some bad network weather or whatever the case may be, you fail that request fast so that the customer can retry more quickly. And then the second one has to do with with deployments. And so this is an area where we're trying to improve some of the experience here, but a lot of customers that use CloudFormation and straight CloudFormation, not SAM. SAM actually helps with this. If they use straight CloudFormation to update their API definition, there is a small sharp edge that the changes that you deploy in CloudFormation sometimes won't actually generate what API Gateway calls a deployment. So an actual snapshot of that configuration to actually deploy the change inside of the API. So we'll oftentimes get customers that will say, I deployed an update to my CloudFormation stack. The CloudFormation stack said it updated, but my API is still running the old version. Why is that? And it has to be this very, unfortunately, small rough edge where the deployment object inside of the CloudFormation template needs to be revisioned in order for CloudFormation to know that it needs to recreate it. And SAM helps with sort of smoothing that process out by ensuring that every time the API definition is updated, that deployment object is versioned to ensure that the deployment happens. So that's a big plus one in sort of using SAM is that it helps you not worry about that particular problem. So those are the two common ones that I've seen a lot in my time helping customers.
All right, excellent. Yeah, I can't echo that enough. SAM really does some of the heavy lifting for you, and it's again widely supported in local development tooling. So I encourage you, if you haven't looked at SAM, I really encourage you to. All right, we got another question coming in here. Yeah, and in serverless framework as well. Yes, we have someone posting that. Yes, they're a great partner and they have some great tooling for this as well. All right, so here's a big one. And I've just covered some faces, so I'll get rid of this in just a moment. Working with Kubernetes, there's conflicting guidance online about using API Gateway as an ingress controller versus just using Kubernetes native ingress controller. I assume this group is biased towards using API Gateway. You assumed correctly. How would you try to convince someone that using API Gateway is the way to go? Related, are there any Kubernetes or EKS items on the public roadmap that you can share? Anyone want to run with that one? Yeah, Ryan.
Hey, so first of all, it's hard for us to talk about things that aren't on the public roadmap. But some of the things we can talk about are, first of all, we are super deeply committed to Kubernetes and making sure that we're able to support Kubernetes in a way that is very natural for Kubernetes users. So we don't want you to have to exit Kubernetes in order to be able to go into API Gateway to configure API Gateway. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing in the future is more tightly integrating API Gateway into the Kubernetes ecosystem. We're super biased about using API Gateway with Kubernetes. And we actually have a lot of customers that push us on this, where they're like, look, I just need some of the API Gateway features like throttling or the ability to do particular kinds of authorization or even transformations. I need those functionality or that type of functionality in front of my Kubernetes cluster. And we've done some work recently to make that better, including the ability for API Gateway with HTTP APIs to plumb directly into an ALB that's sitting inside of a VPC. And that kind of work has really helped out a number of customers with getting started. But we think we can do more. We think we can keep raising the bar here, and that's going to be stuff that we're doing in the future.
Awesome. All righty. Anyone else want to throw anything on that one? All righty. Okay, so here we got another one here. Okay, we have a comment here. I don't think it's really a question, but unmarshaled Dynamo responses, please. I can jump on that real quick here. Really, that's more of an SDK thing. It's handled in the language, and if you guys disagree with me, that's fine. But And I guess if you're directly talking to DynamoDB, so if you're doing a direct integration, that's something that would be really helpful is if API Gateway did that. But if you're using Lambda, you're using Dynamo, the SDK, if you use the document client versus just the DynamoDB client, then a lot of that unmarshalling happens for you as well. So, all righty. So, but yes, he is talking about directly integrating. So there you go, Ryan. That's probably going to go to the top of your list because I want that too. So I appreciate that. All righty. So let's jump on. Any other questions coming in here? If not, I've got some questions that were sent to me earlier. And I'm all right. So Alan, you referred to this earlier. So it's probably going to be you and Ryan are going to talk about this. HTTP API, right? We released it in beta at reInvent last year, and it went GA earlier this year in March, I believe. Mm-hmm. Tell me why we did API Gateway. Or I'm sorry. Tell me why we did HTTP API. Why are we doing this? Tell me why we built HTTP API. What was the driver behind that, Alan?
I think Ryan wanted to take this one, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Sure. Hey, look, we had a bunch of customers, and somebody, and I tried to look it up before this meeting, and I didn't have a chance to pineapple pizza.
Yeah, did you see that?
I didn't have a chance to find the exact person who tweeted this, but they summed it up beautifully in that 160 character limit. They said, I want the core functionality of REST APIs at a fraction of the price. And we had been working on this already. We had been thinking, we're getting feedback from customers that was like, look, I don't need everything. I just want the core functionality cheaper. And so that got us really pushing forward on building a new version of API Gateway called HTTP APIs. I will admit, there's been a lot of Twitter feedback that we did not get the best name, here. And so we're trying to figure out if we need to rethink that. We have a couple of people that just call it V2, which is actually the right way to think about it. We've totally rebuilt our data plane and built this new data plane that's way more efficient than what we had before. And because it's more efficient, we've been able to reduce prices dramatically. Because customers wanted that core functionality as quickly as possible, we got it out the door right away. And we added OIDC and OAuth support because that was a big request from our customers. Now, one of the things that we're doing is we're continuing to add more and more functionality because we know that there are things that are in REST APIs that people want in HTTP APIs. They want it to be cheaper, to do things like Lambda authorizers or transformations or validations. And all of that stuff, all of these popular features in REST APIs are things that we will eventually provide inside of the HTTP API product as well. So eventually you'll be able to use REST APIs or you'll be able to use HTTP APIs. And in a very classic Amazonian fashion, we'll just be iterating progressively over the coming months to add that kind of functionality into HTTP APIs. So eventually you'll be able to use HTTP APIs for everything you use REST APIs for right now.
So can you tell any of the, and again, I'm going to let you gate this, but what do we learn in building it? I mean, can you talk about how we approached the build?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff that we learned was, how do we keep driving down latency was something that was important for a smaller set of customers, but they're really big. They run a really big workload. And I think it was George, you mentioned earlier that we had a big reduction in latency as part of the product. We obsess over things like P99 latency for our services. And so we looked at P99 latency in our US East 1 data center, which is our biggest region for API Gateway. And we saw that at P99 we were about 30 milliseconds. And we thought, wow, how can we do better? We had some customers that needed us to get down quite a bit. And we measured that our latency dropped from about 30 milliseconds down to about 10. So about a 60% reduction in latency, something we're super happy with. We're going to keep pushing to bring down latency further. We also saw that pricing dropped up to 71% with this new release because we were able to go from $3.50 per million requests with REST APIs down to about $1. That kind of improvement was, again, because of the efficiency of the platform. And Bob, who is part of the data plane team, actually was instrumental in a number of these changes that we built in the data plane in order to be able to just make it way more efficient. And because it's so much more efficient, we're able to drop cost as well.
Yeah, behind that beard is an amazing brain. Bob's a sharp guy, and well, the everybody on this panel is, well, 5 out of 6 isn't bad, but So all right. So the next question I have, any other questions regarding that? Looks like we have a couple of questions coming in. Nope. But there's been a lot of talk about direct integration and how that works. Now, all right. So going on the HTTP API. Direct integration, is that coming to HTTP API?
I'll say that everything that we've been doing in all the features that we have in REST API are features that we're looking at implementing in as we go into HTTP APIs. And one thing I want to point out on this too is we're taking this as an opportunity to do things better. Like we've learned a lot in the last 4 years of being in market. We have a bunch of customers that have been super helpful in telling us what they need. And one of the things that we heard that we could do better is support for API keys. Right now there's a limit of 10,000 API keys in REST APIs, and that works for a lot of people. But we have a number of customers that are like, I need like 1 million API keys. Yeah. I need one for every one of my subscribers or something like that. And so we're really taking this as an opportunity to revision things as we do them in HTTP APIs. Instead of building them exactly the way we did in REST APIs, there are several cases where we can raise the bar and do better. And so we're taking the time to make sure we do that. So instead of just straight porting everything over, we have some opportunities where we can make things quite a bit better. And we're going to do that because that's going to meet the kind of customer requirements that we have, especially as we're evolving as a service. So for everybody who's sending us feedback, and sending me directly feedback on Twitter is great. Sending it to Eric is even better because, Eric loves getting feedback. But
I'm a talker.
In all seriousness, tell us what you need, and we're super happy to help out. This is a really exciting space for us. At AWS, we're investing deeply in API Gateway. We think it's really important for building large-scale container-based or serverless applications, and so we're here to help.
All right. All right, so we have a question coming in from our YouTube watchers here. It says, when should we use API Gateway app sync use cases? So I think what's being asked here is when API Gateway, when app sync, and how do I differentiate? Can they work together? That kind of thing. Anybody want to jump on that one? Everybody's avoiding me. All right, George, go.
Yeah, so API Gateway primarily communicates over HTTP using REST, right? We do have WebSocket support, which when you need to build real-time applications, you can use that. AppSync is a managed service that communicates over HTTP as well, but it uses GraphQL as the implementation. So typically, when you post against a GraphQL or AppSync implementation, you're posting against a single endpoint URL, and it's only accepting HTTP posts. So it's your job to request what you need from the backend as a client, and then the AppSync service will return the results of all of the services it integrates on the backend. HTTP, like REST APIs, HTTP APIs, the API Gateway, these are typically a lot more widespread in the industry. A lot of the COTS products you see out there will be using, typical CRUD-based HTTP put, post, delete, all these actions that you'll use today. So I think it really comes down to an implementation choice, right? Do you want to have the client be the creator of the query or what you need, or do you want the API to define the structure of the request and response model? And with that, you will publish documentation and all that stuff. But you'll see most of the API AWS services, probably I'd say most of them are today are REST HTTP based.
Right on. All right. So I have another question coming in here about HTTP API. It says about HTTP API, why can we not have authorizer for each route? We have only one authorizer for all routes. Well, the good news is you can. If one of y'all want to jump on that from a technical standpoint, anybody want to jump on it?
Yeah, I'll go ahead on that one. Yeah, so the authorizer is actually set on the route. So while you can certainly create one authorizer and use it across all of your routes, you can choose to enable the authorizer on a subset of your routes, or you create multiple authorizers and use a different authorizer for each route if you want. I'm not sure exactly where the impression came that you can only use a single authorizer. I don't know if that's the framework they're using, but certainly the API Gateway API supports defining an authorizer per route.
Right. And if you were to do that in SAM, there's two ways you can approach it. You can actually set a general authorizer, and that's applied to everything, right? And that's a setting. And then at each function, you can opt out of that authorizer, or you can not set a general one, and then you opt into the authorizer of your choice at each function setting. So you definitely can choose different authorizers. You're not limited to just the one. All right. We got questions flowing in now here. Okay. So going back to, I have this question. It was answered earlier, so I'll explain. Is there a roadmap for HTTP API like API usage plan, API key? There is, as Ryan was saying earlier. If you can do it in REST API, eventually we'll be able to do it in HTTP API, and we're evaluating the best way to do that. So that's the plan. So the time frame I can't give you, but the answer of yes, I can give you. All righty. Okay. So another question we have that came in actually before the show said, how do I use API Gateway to filter out requests that don't have a certain header? And the backstory is that someone's trying to validate some Twilio requests that come in, and they don't even want to evaluate them if they don't have the right header. So how can we just bounce that right at the API Gateway level if the header's not included? Anybody want to jump on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think the context of this question was that that header was actually being used for authentication and authorization. And so the easiest way to do this is to implement a Lambda authorizer. And when you define your Lambda authorizer, you're going to define what's called an identity source. And so that is a set of headers or query string parameters where the authentication information is actually embedded. And if the request doesn't have those headers or query string parameters, then API Gateway will just reject it at the front door and throw back an unauthorized response as a result. So that's the easiest way to do that if you're looking for filtering for authentication-based headers. Then if you were looking for something that wasn't authentication-based, then request validation would be another mechanism for you to do that. It's a slightly different flavor, but you can ensure that a particular header is present and has a particular kind of value in it using JSON schema.
Yeah, and there's on the URL shortener application we were talking about a little bit earlier. It's just API Gateway DynamoDB. It's all VTL, but there's quite a few examples of validating data coming in. And so again, and this is one of those things where I hear a lot of people go, I wish I'd have known. I wish I'd have known at the beginning that I can validate data and not even invoke that Lambda. Let's save Lambda invocations. If the data's not right, we don't want it. So going on that theme, and everybody gets to throw in here, if you had one thing where someone has said, I wished I'd have known this about API Gateway, what have you heard the most? We hear a lot, so I wish I'd have known this did this.
So I think there's one thing that some customers who may have been using the service for a long time may not be aware of. So we have a lot of customers that use usage plans. So that's allowing a caller defined by an API key to set throttling rates or quotas set on a per caller basis. But a lot of customers aren't necessarily aware of the fact that basically what that does is it sets a global call rate inside of the API, but we actually have support for fine-grained throttling inside of a usage plan. So that's like setting a per route limit inside of the usage plan. So it allows you to define sort of more fine-grained throttling inside of a usage plan. So it's not just an all or nothing, like I'm going to throttle all my customers to X TPS. Like I can say that like, oh, my, to use Alan's example from previous, like my expensive post is at a lower rate, but my reads are at a higher rate because I can cache those. So as an example, so that's one thing And then the second thing, also in the flavor of usage plans, is that so the original version of usage plans required you to specify that the API key was actually in a very specific header, so it was X API key. We also have the support for doing Lambda authorization integration, so you can actually not even require the API key to be inside of the request. It can actually be derived from some other source. Yeah. So if you have a custom authorization scheme and you want to put a customer into a caller bucket, you can use the Lambda authorizer and return the API key from your Lambda authorizer to then have that be used to drive your throttling rates.
All right.
I think that's the number one thing that customers have told me about, is they're sometimes not aware that you can choose to have the API key source come from a header or from an authorizer. I think that's big. The other thing is we actually have a few different deployment flavors of REST APIs. So there's like edge optimized, there's regional, there's private APIs. Private APIs makes a lot of sense, but sometimes customers will choose the non-best one for their use case, and that's okay. I mean, you can go back and flip it. It's really easy to change from one API gateway deployment flavor to another, but customers will sometimes start with edge optimized just because it sounds like it's bigger and on the edge, but the regional is sometimes better actually for the use case.
Yeah, so talk. I'm gonna interrupt here because this is a question I get a lot. Talk me through real quick. We got a couple others coming in, so I want to get to them quickly. But when I choose edge, what does that mean? And a lot of people everything's all automatic pushed out. We're caching out there. But that's not necessarily the case, is it? So can you talk through what that means?
Yeah. So API Gateway, the service is a regional service, which means if you're in West 1, we deploy in that region. If you choose edge optimized, we put a CloudFront distribution sort of on your behalf on top of the API, and that helps to reduce the first hit latency. And it uses our edge locations from CloudFront to take the request and then forward it to your regional API. So if you have customers or clients of your API that are sort of all over the globe, essentially, this might be the flavor that you choose. Right now, if you have a use case where most of your requests come from EC2 or from a specific geography, you might just want to deploy it in a regional format. Okay.
So Alan, you were going to say something.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that the regional and edge configuration is actually on the endpoint. So when you first create the API and you pick the regional or edge, that's actually determining the configuration for the execute API endpoint that comes, by default with every single API Gateway API. You can also make the same configuration when you create a custom domain, right? So you can say api.example.com. That one can also be edge or regional, and that's because that configuration of whether or not there's a CloudFront there is on the domain itself, and it's not, tied to the API directly.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah, so just one little thing to tag on there that about the point Alan just made. One of the common use cases when we actually launched regional endpoints was as customers wanting to have APIs or domains that actually spanned multiple regions. And so the way that you would actually do that is by creating a regional API that actually is deployed in multiple API Gateway regions, and then have a DNS using Route 53 load balanced across all of those regions. So it gives you cross region redundancy. Obviously, you have to figure out what your data modeling and figure that out. Maybe it's DynamoDB global tables, but you have to have some mechanism to sort of replicate your data across the regions. But that at least allows you to give your API front end region replication.
Yeah, going alongside that, I'm going to pull up this question here because it says, shouldn't API be behind a CloudFront distribution for web apps, or is there a use case where you don't want to use? So I want to stay on this same theme, and I want you all to correct me if I'm wrong, but when I choose an edge location, that means I'm bringing the access point closer to the customers globally, right? But it doesn't mean I'm caching on those endpoints. right? So it's just a code. So the other way of doing this is, and I think y'all alluded to this or said it actually, is keeping the API gateway regionally. If I want to actually use the CDN and cache this information out at the endpoints, then I put a CloudFront distribution in front of that. And this goes to this question is that's the same way you can do with HTTP API as well. HTTP APIs are only regional. And so if you want to make those globally reaching using and CDN and local access points to customers, then you would want to use CloudFront in front of that. So really, I guess I'm running with this question. To answer this, it's kind of it's a preference thing. If you want to be able to, if you want to bring the actual data closer to your customers and give them closer endpoints to access it on, then a CDN makes sense. Ryan, you were going to throw something in.
I'm just backing up what you said there, and okay. I think some of the feedback that we got as we were building out both REST APIs and developing HTTP APIs was that a lot of times customers are more concerned about the latency and how we're communicating with the backend systems, and so the regional kind of deployment makes a lot of sense for folks. Something else that we learned was that as the CDN side of things keeps getting more and more sophisticated, and CloudFront keeps adding more and more functionality, it began to make more sense for us to have customers configure CloudFront on their own rather than expecting us to configure it for them. Because when we configure it for customers, it means that we're maybe not enabling some very specific features that they might want. And so kind of decoupling API Gateway from CloudFront turned out to be a good decision for us, and has, I think, really helped customers be able to use some of the more nuanced and specific features of CloudFront in combination with API Gateway. Yeah.
My general approach is to build my own API Gateway regionally and then put CloudFront in front of it if I need it. And I think that's good advice. All right, so we have another one here. This one might be quick. Is there a way to increase API Gateway timeout while acting as a proxy to Lambda? We have a use case where Lambda returns results in 35 seconds, but the API Gateway returns beforehand, so it times out.
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is go ahead and reach out to us, and we can do timeout increases for customers. I would just keep in mind the advice that Bob gave early on in this discussion, where for a lot of customers, it makes sense to actually have a shorter timeout than using the default 29-second timeout. And that's something where is great for people to keep an eye on, because you want to keep your timeout closer to your P99 or P95 kind of latency. But for people that need to go longer, go ahead and reach out to us, and we can help out with longer timeouts.
I would also challenge you to evaluate your workload as well. A lot of times when we have folks say, well, and this is like when we get that from a Lambda perspective, Lambda functions, well, my process is longer than 15 minutes. And that may be so. Those are out there. But have you explored asynchronous? Have you explored, using queues and things like that to run through the process rather than just a synchronous call that sits out there? And there are some times where you go, yeah, I have, and it's absolutely not possible. But what I find is a lot of folks go, yeah, I guess we could do this asynchronously, because a lot of times, especially on a website, if a customer's waiting 35 seconds, I'm moving on. I mean, this is broken. You've charged my credit card twice. I'm moving on. So we want to really, when we move to asynchronous calls and we move that to instant reaction for the customer, there's a little bit more, they feel better about that. So, all right.
So it's a great point to shout out a little bit about not only switching to a queuing system, but even using something like step functions, which can really be helpful for coordinating a bunch of work that needs to occur in some sort of big processing situation.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a long one here. I haven't read the whole thing. I've covered all your faces, but that's okay. You can see my bald head. That's me. Is it possible to merge two standalone deployed API Lambda service parts with different resource and methods in a single domain name with custom domain API mapping? There's a limitation to map only unique path names. I have service A and I think you all are reading this. So it's hard to develop separately this service. They must be merged or have some integration team. So are we able to merge those parts using link pathing? And if you've read this, it might make more sense.
Yeah, unfortunately not. There is a limitation that custom domain-based path mappings only work at one level today. That is not it's not a particularly hard restriction. It's just not something that we've been able to update today. But yes, that would not be possible today, because if you have test / something and then test / something else, then that would be something that you would not be able to do with custom domains, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. I'm going to pop this up and just say, I know this person was asking about the multiple authorizers using different authorizers. If you'll look at, and I'm gonna actually pull up this link here real quick. On this link is a series called Sessions with Sam. And in the first and second episodes, I show how to do different types of authorizers based on different issuers, different things like that, all with the new HTTP API and JWT. And if you don't get your answer there, hit me. I'm going to put it in the chat here. Hit me at EDJ Geek on Twitter, and I will get you help on this. But yeah, it is possible, and glad to help out with that. All righty. I don't see any more questions coming in at the moment here. I do have a statement here. New features for API WebSockets, more easy to use. So there's some feedback for the team. Can we make WebSockets easier to use? That would be great. All righty. So I have another question that came in beforehand real quick. Let me turn this off. This is a first time moderating, running the stream, doing all that. So you guys are being patient with me, and I really appreciate that. All right, so I have a question here. How can I get, if we're talking HTTP, JWT, all that kind of stuff, I have someone that's asking, how can I get the username from the JWT, the token? Anybody want to?
I can take this one.
George, go
yeah. So it does depend on where the JWT comes from, but in most cases, there's 3 types of JWT tokens, or JSON Web Tokens. They are an ID token, access token, and a refresh token. The ID and access tokens are typically, if you're using OpenID Connect or AWS Cognito, they're going to be signed and not encrypted, which means that anybody can decode those tokens as long as you have the public key available and verify those tokens. Once you do that, these tokens are just 3-part alphanumeric strings, right? So you can just decode this token. One of the claims in that token, if it's from Cognito, will be username, and you'll be able to extract that and basically send that downstream using a velocity template, pass it on to a Lambda function, whatever it needs. You can also just go to jwt.io, paste that JWT token in, and just look at what's in there. And then if you're using a refresh token, those are going to be encrypted, right? So you're not going to be able to decrypt those right on the fly like that. But there's a nice document on our website that tells you how to, it walks you through this, that we'll paste into the chat.
Yep. I'll get that right now. I'm going to post that. And with that, guess what? We are out of time. That hour went fast. I just posted that both to YouTube and to Twitch, the link that he was referring to. I want to say thank you to my whole team. Zainab, I was so glad you were able to talk finally in there. Ryan, I know you all are very busy building this, and so to get time with you is great, and I really appreciate it. Next week, we're going to do this again, not with this team. You watch the shock in their eyes. With the team from SAM, okay? The folks that build the SAM CLI and the SAM Transform. We're going to be meeting same time, same place. It's going to be Ask the Experts for Sessions with SAM. And so I'm really excited about this. For all of you who ask questions, thank you so much. This will automatically be on YouTube. It's automatically going to be on Twitch, so you can rewatch it and get these golden nuggets and make them work. If you didn't get your question answered, hit me on Twitter. Don't hit me, but send me text messages to EDJ Geek on Twitter. And I bug these folks every day. You can ask them. I text Alan more than he wants. So I will get an answer for you. And with that, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe and have happy little APIs. See you later.
Bye.